Let's listen to these words. In every moment of his life, whether surrounded by crowds or alone in the wilderness, Jesus showed us the way. Before the miracles, before the breakthroughs, before the victories, he thanked God. Not when everything was perfect, not after the blessing had arrived, but before it all. He gave thanks in faith, knowing that God's plan was bigger than the storm he faced. Gratitude precedes miracles. This truth is woven throughout Scripture and visible in the life of Jesus. It's not just a suggestion or a nice thought, it's a principle that holds immense power. When Jesus performed miracles, he didn't just act out of his divine authority, he first gave thanks to God. He didn't wait for the situation to change or the miracle to occur. He thanked God before anything happened, demonstrating an unwavering trust in the Father's ability to provide. Think of the feeding of the 5,000. The crowd was vast, and the resources were limited: 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. To the disciples, the situation seemed impossible. They were overwhelmed by the need and discouraged by the lack. But Jesus didn't focus on what they didn't have. He lifted his eyes to heaven, took the little they had, and thanked God for it. That moment of gratitude wasn't just a ritual or formality. It was a profound act of faith, acknowledging God's power to multiply and provide. And what followed was nothing short of miraculous. Everyone was fed, and there were 12 baskets of leftovers. Gratitude isn't just about acknowledging what's already happened, it's about anticipating what's yet to come. It's declaring that God is good, faithful, and capable even before you see the evidence. This kind of gratitude is rooted in faith, not circumstances. When you thank God in advance, you're demonstrating trust that he's already working, even if you can't see it. You're aligning your heart with his will and opening the door for his power to move in your life. In the story of Lazarus, Jesus once again showed us this principle. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. The situation was hopeless from a human perspective. Yet when Jesus arrived at the tomb, he didn't begin with a desperate plea or complaint. Instead, he said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." He thanked God before calling Lazarus to come out of the tomb. His gratitude was an expression of confidence in God's authority over life and death. And moments later, Lazarus walked out alive. Gratitude shifts your perspective. It takes your focus off what's missing and places it on God's sufficiency. When you thank God first, you're choosing to see the possibilities instead of the limitations. You're choosing to believe in his power rather than be overwhelmed by the problem. Gratitude creates an atmosphere of faith, and faith is the environment where miracles happen. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, but with faith, even the size of a mustard seed, mountains can move. In our own lives, it's easy to get stuck focusing on what we lack. We see the obstacles, the challenges, and the unanswered prayers, and we let doubt creep in. But Jesus teaches us a better way. Instead of dwelling on what we don't have, we can thank God for who he is and what he's already done. Gratitude transforms our mindset. It turns worry into worship, fear into trust, and doubt into faith. When we approach God with thanksgiving, we're acknowledging that he's greater than any problem we face. Gratitude is also contagious. When Jesus thanked God before performing miracles, it wasn't just an act of personal faith. It was a testimony to those around him. It showed the disciples and the crowds what it looks like to trust God completely. In the same way, when we practice gratitude in our lives, we inspire others to do the same. Our faith-filled thanksgiving can be a light in the darkness, pointing people to the God who is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. Thanking God first is an act of faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. It requires believing in God's promises even when the physical evidence suggests otherwise. When you thank God before seeing the outcome, you're expressing confidence that he is already at work. This act of faith declares that you trust in his timing, his wisdom, and his ability to bring about the best result. It shifts your focus from what you can do to what God can do, and that shift is where true miracles begin. Jesus demonstrated this principle in his life and ministry. Before many of his most significant acts, he gave thanks. He didn't wait for the miracle to manifest before acknowledging God's role in it. He thanked God in anticipation, showing an unshakable trust in the Father's provision and power. This wasn't just a tradition or a formula, it was a deeply rooted expression of faith that God's promises were as good as fulfilled, even if the evidence wasn't yet visible. When we thank God first, we're acknowledging that He is sovereign and that He has everything under control. It's easy to express gratitude when things are going well, when the prayers are answered, the blessings are visible, and the path is clear. But real faith is thanking Him when things are uncertain. It's lifting your hands in gratitude even when the storm hasn't subsided. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, the kind that pleases God. The Bible is filled with examples of individuals who thank God in faith, and their stories remind us of the power of this principle. Take Paul and Silas, for example. They were beaten and thrown into prison, locked away in chains and surrounded by darkness. They had every reason to complain, to question, to doubt, but instead they chose to sing praises and thank God. In the natural, their situation was bleak, yet their faith allowed them to rise above their circumstances and give thanks. And what happened? An earthquake shook the prison, their chains were broken, and they were set free. Thanking God first is about aligning your heart with His will. It's recognizing that He's working behind the scenes, even if you can't see it yet. When you express gratitude, you're making a declaration: God, I trust You. I believe You're working this out for my good. I know You're faithful, and I'm choosing to rest in that truth. That kind of faith not only honors God, but also positions you to receive His blessings. It prepares your heart to see His hand at work and to experience His power in ways you never imagined. Gratitude is a powerful antidote to fear and doubt. When you're facing challenges, it's natural to focus on the difficulties and let anxiety take over. But when you intentionally thank God, you're redirecting your thoughts. You're reminding yourself of His faithfulness, His promises, and His unchanging character. That act of faith builds your confidence and strengthens your resolve. It allows you to stand firm, even when the ground beneath you feels shaky. It helps you see beyond the temporary and trust in the eternal. Faith-filled gratitude also has a profound impact on those around you. When people see you thanking God in the midst of uncertainty, it's a powerful testimony of trust and hope. It shows them what it looks like to rely on God completely, to believe in His promises even when they're not yet visible. Your act of faith can inspire others to trust Him more deeply, to see beyond their circumstances, and to place their hope in Him. Thanking God first becomes a ripple effect, spreading faith and encouragement to everyone it touches. Jesus modeled gratitude in every situation. Throughout His ministry, He demonstrated time and again the power of giving thanks, not just as a polite gesture, but as a profound spiritual practice. His gratitude was an essential part of His relationship with the Father, and it revealed to us a way of living that aligns with God's will and invites His presence into our circumstances. Jesus didn't wait for things to be perfect or for the situation to improve before expressing His thanks. He showed us that gratitude is a powerful tool that connects us to the heart of God and helps us see His hand at work, even in the most challenging moments. One of the most striking examples of Jesus modeling gratitude is found in the feeding of the 5,000. Faced with a massive crowd and only a small amount of food, Jesus didn't focus on the overwhelming need or the scarcity of resources. Instead, He took what He had: 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and gave thanks. He thanked God for the little that was available, demonstrating that His trust wasn't in the circumstances but in the Father's ability to provide. This act of gratitude was an acknowledgement that even in the face of scarcity, God is able to multiply and meet the needs of His people. When Jesus thanked God first, He invited divine intervention into the situation, and what followed was a miracle. Thousands of people were fed, and there were even leftovers. In another moment, just before raising Lazarus from the dead, Jesus demonstrated the power of gratitude. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, and the situation seemed hopeless. Yet, instead of focusing on the fact that Lazarus was gone and the mourners were grieving, Jesus took a moment to thank God. He said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Jesus thanked God even before performing the miracle. This act of gratitude was a testament to his complete trust in God's power, no matter how impossible the situation appeared. It was a declaration that no matter what, God's will would be done. And when Jesus spoke, Lazarus emerged from the tomb alive, proving that gratitude in the face of death has the power to bring forth life. Jesus also modeled gratitude in his prayers. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he faced the greatest trial of his life, he prayed to the Father with deep emotion, but he also expressed his trust in God's plan. Even though he knew the cross awaited him, he surrendered his will to the Father, saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." In that moment of deep anguish, Jesus' prayer was one of submission and gratitude for the opportunity to fulfill the Father's will. He didn't run from the challenge. He embraced it with a heart of thankfulness, knowing that his sacrifice would bring salvation to the world. The act of giving thanks was so ingrained in Jesus' life that it became part of every moment, even in times of great hardship. He understood that gratitude shifts the focus from the problem to the provider, from the pain to the purpose. By thanking God first, Jesus invited the Father into every situation, allowing God's power to be made manifest. This practice is one we are called to imitate. Jesus didn't just teach gratitude, he lived it. And his life was a testament to the transformative power of a thankful heart. When we model gratitude like Jesus did, we open ourselves up to God's presence and power. Gratitude isn't just about being thankful when things are good. It's about trusting God in every moment, even in the darkest times. It's about acknowledging his sovereignty over every circumstance and recognizing that, no matter what we face, he is always worthy of our thanks. Jesus' example shows us that gratitude is not just a response to blessing, but a posture of the heart that invites God's intervention, strengthens our faith, and aligns us with his will. Gratitude shifts your focus from the problem to God's power. Life often brings challenges that can seem insurmountable. We face struggles, obstacles, and moments when the weight of the world feels heavy upon our shoulders. In these times, it's easy to focus solely on the problem, on what's wrong, what's lacking, or what feels impossible. But when we choose to thank God, we shift our focus away from the problem and onto his power. Gratitude becomes a tool that helps us reframe our situation, not by ignoring the difficulties, but by recognizing the greatness of God in the midst of them. When you focus on the problem, your mind is consumed by the obstacles. The more you dwell on what's wrong, the more those problems appear to grow, to take on a life of their own. They begin to dominate your thoughts, your emotions, and your energy. The weight of worry, anxiety, and fear builds, and soon you find yourself overwhelmed, feeling like there's no way out. But when you choose to thank God first, you're making a conscious decision to look beyond the problem to the God who is greater than any challenge. You're acknowledging that while the problem may be real, God's power is greater. Thanking God in the midst of difficulty doesn't change the fact that you may be facing tough times, but it changes the way you approach them. Instead of letting the problem consume your thoughts and energy, gratitude recenters your mind on God's abilities, his faithfulness, and his promises. It's an act of faith, a declaration that you believe God is bigger than what you're up against. This shift in perspective is powerful. It opens your heart to the possibility of solutions, breakthroughs, and miracles, because you're no longer focused solely on the limitation before you. Instead, your eyes are lifted to the one who can make a way when there seems to be no way. Jesus demonstrated this shift in focus throughout his life. In the face of adversity, he continually looked to God and expressed gratitude. When he stood before the tomb of Lazarus, he was surrounded by grief and despair. The situation appeared hopeless, and even those around him questioned whether anything could be done. Yet, before calling Lazarus out of the grave, Jesus first looked to the heavens and thanked God. His gratitude wasn't based on the visible circumstances. It was based on his trust in God's power to overcome even the most final of human limitations. Jesus chose to focus not on the finality of death, but on the life-giving power of God. That act of gratitude shifted the atmosphere, and in that moment, death was defeated. Gratitude works in the same way in our lives. It doesn't deny the reality of the problem, but it acknowledges the supremacy of God's power. It says, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is difficult, but I will choose to thank God because I know He is greater than this challenge. This shift in focus doesn't just help us endure the struggle, it empowers us to face it with strength and courage. We move from a place of fear and doubt to a place of faith and trust. We stop seeing ourselves as helpless victims of our circumstances and begin to see ourselves as children of a mighty God who is able to do exceedingly, abundantly, above all that we ask or think. Gratitude also brings a sense of peace that transcends understanding. When you focus on God's power rather than your problems, you experience a peace that guards your heart and mind. The worries that once seemed overwhelming begin to lose their hold on you. The uncertainty that once caused anxiety begins to fade, and in its place, there's a sense of calm confidence that God is in control. This peace doesn't come from the absence of problems, but from the presence of God. When we choose to focus on His power through gratitude, we experience the peace that surpasses all understanding. This shift in focus also deepens our relationship with God. When we thank Him, we acknowledge His goodness, His faithfulness, and His sovereignty. It's a declaration that we trust Him, not just in the good times, but in the difficult ones as well. Gratitude strengthens our connection with God because it invites His presence into every situation. It creates an environment where faith can grow, where trust can deepen, and where miracles can happen. Gratitude doesn't just change the way we view our problems, it changes the way we experience God. Faith and gratitude unlock God's promises. In the Bible, we are repeatedly reminded of God's faithfulness and the incredible promises He has made to His people. But for those promises to be activated in our lives, we must approach them with a heart of faith and gratitude. When we combine these two powerful forces, we align ourselves with God's will and open the door for His blessings to flow freely. Faith is the belief that God will do what He has said He will do. And gratitude is the acknowledgement that He is already at work, even before we see the manifestation of His promises. The Bible is clear that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith is the foundation of everything we receive from God. It's the belief that He is who He says He is and that He will do what He has promised to do. However, faith alone is not enough. Gratitude is the attitude that unlocks the full potential of that faith. Gratitude expresses our trust in God and our belief that He is faithful to fulfill His promises, even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. Consider the story of the Israelites as they wandered through the desert. God had promised them the land of Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey. But when they encountered challenges and obstacles, they began to lose sight of that promise. They grumbled and complained, focusing more on their lack than on God's ability to provide. However, those who kept their faith and gratitude in God, like Caleb and Joshua, were the ones who ultimately entered the promised land. Their gratitude and trust in God's promise kept them focused on the end goal, and that faith and gratitude opened the door to their victory. Similarly, when Jesus healed the 10 lepers, only one of them returned to thank Him. The others received their healing, but it was the one who came back with gratitude who experienced something even greater. Jesus said to him, "Your faith has made you whole." This leper didn't just receive physical healing, he received spiritual restoration as well. Gratitude, in this case, wasn't merely an acknowledgement of a blessing, it was an expression of faith that unlocks something deeper. When we express our gratitude, we are not only acknowledging what God has done, but also declaring that we believe He is worthy of all our trust and praise. Gratitude is a powerful act of faith that says, "I believe, and I thank you for what you have done, what you are doing, and what you will continue to do." Gratitude is also a way of proclaiming our belief in God's promises before we see them come to fruition. It's easy to thank God after a prayer is answered or after a blessing arrives, but true faith and gratitude happen when we can give thanks before we see the results. This act of thanksgiving, even in the midst of uncertainty, acknowledges that God is already at work, fulfilling His promises. It's a declaration that we trust in His timing, His plan, and His ability to provide. In thanking God first, we affirm that we believe His promises are as good as fulfilled, even when the physical evidence hasn't yet appeared. One of the most profound examples of this is the story of Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, but for years there was no child. Despite the years of waiting and the seemingly impossible circumstance, Abraham did not waver in his faith. In Romans 4:20, it says, "Yet he did not waver through unbelief regarding the promise of God, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God." Abraham's faith and gratitude were inseparable. Even though the promise hadn't been realized yet, Abraham thanked God for what he had already promised, trusting that God would deliver. And God did. Isaac was born, and Abraham's faith and gratitude unlocked the fulfillment of God's promise. In the same way, when we thank God in advance for what He is going to do, we unlock the power of His promises in our lives. Gratitude acts as a key that opens the door to the fullness of God's provision. It's not just about recognizing what God has already done. It's about declaring our trust in what He is going to do. When we give thanks before we see the outcome, we are choosing to align ourselves with God's will and inviting His intervention in our lives. This kind of faith and gratitude is what empowers us to live in the fullness of His promises, trusting that He is always working on our behalf, even when we can't see the evidence yet. Start every prayer with thanksgiving, just like Jesus did. When we approach God in prayer, it's easy to be consumed with our requests, our concerns, and our needs. We often come to God looking for answers, for direction, or for help in times of trouble. But Jesus showed us a different way. He taught us that before we present our petitions or express our worries, we should first offer thanks to God. By beginning our prayers with gratitude, we align ourselves with God's will, open our hearts to His presence, and set the tone for the rest of our conversation with Him. Jesus demonstrated this practice in many instances throughout His ministry. In the feeding of the 5,000, before breaking the bread and multiplying it, He first gave thanks to God. He didn't start by asking for provision or even by focusing on the needs of the people. Instead, He started with a grateful heart, acknowledging God as the source of all good things. By thanking God first, Jesus invited the Father's presence into the moment and set in motion the miracle that would follow. This act of gratitude wasn't just a formality, it was an expression of Jesus' deep trust in God's ability to provide, even when the situation seemed impossible. Similarly, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, He didn't jump straight to the miracle. He began by thanking God. He said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." This statement was not just a polite expression, it was an affirmation of Jesus' faith in the Father's power and His trust that God had already answered the prayer. Jesus thanked God before seeing the miracle manifest. He understood that prayer is not just about asking for something, it's about acknowledging God's power and His willingness to work in our lives. By starting with thanksgiving, Jesus set the stage for the miracle to unfold. Thanking God first in our prayers is a practice that helps us shift our focus. When we begin with gratitude, we take our eyes off the problem and place them on the provider. We acknowledge that God is already at work, even if we can't see it yet. Thanksgiving helps us remember all the ways God has already blessed us, which strengthens our faith and trust in Him. It's easy to become overwhelmed by our struggles, but when we start with thankfulness, we are reminded of God's faithfulness, His goodness, and His unchanging love. Gratitude shifts our mindset from one of need and lack to one of abundance and blessing. This act of gratitude is also a way of aligning ourselves with God's will. It shows that we are not just coming to God with a list of demands, but are humbling ourselves before Him, recognizing that He is sovereign over every area of our lives. When we thank God first, we're acknowledging His authority and His goodness. We're saying, God, I trust you with my life, and I trust that you are working for my good, even in ways I cannot see. This posture of humility and trust invites God to move in our lives in a way that is aligned with His perfect will. Jesus' practice of starting His prayers with thanksgiving also teaches us about the nature of prayer itself. Prayer is not just a transactional exchange where we ask for things. It's a relational conversation with God. It's an opportunity to connect with the Father, to express our gratitude for who He is, and to listen to His guidance. When we start our prayers with thanksgiving, we are reminding ourselves of the relationship we have with God, one that is built on trust, love, and gratitude. Thanksgiving is the foundation of prayer because it sets the tone for a deeper, more intimate conversation with God. In our own lives, when we begin our prayers with thanksgiving, we set the stage for God to work in powerful ways. It may not always be easy, especially when we're facing difficult circumstances, but choosing to thank God first aligns our hearts with His. It opens the door for His presence to fill our lives and for His peace to surround us. Gratitude in prayer isn't about pretending that everything is perfect. It's about acknowledging God's greatness and His ability to work in all circumstances, both good and bad. It's about recognizing that no matter what we face, God is worthy of our praise and His promises are sure. Starting every prayer with thanksgiving helps us approach God with the right heart, one that is full of faith, trust, and gratitude.